So in this video, we're going to incorporate some JavaScript into our Django app. We're continuing on with our wordy game implementation using pure Django and pure JavaScript. And what we're going to do in this video is we're going to start refactoring our site's set password function so that it's going to work via AJAX instead of as a standard HTTP post request using a form like it is right now. In this video, what we're going to do is set up and get JavaScript running on our Django app, and then in the next video, we're actually going to make the AJAX call that will set our user's password. Again, I want to point out with this wordy game app that the way I'm implementing this is sort of insane. It's not the way you'd want to do a production app. I just want to show a couple of examples to you guys of using AJAX. So that's why we're setting the password this way. This isn't the way I'm like recommending you would ever do it in a real app. In a real app, what I would really suggest is just using Django's built-in login functionality. But we're doing it this way just to show you an example of dealing with AJAX. And I kind of want to show the transition between like this is a standard, we've implemented it as a standard HTML form. Now I'm going to change that so that it's an AJAX form. So let's get started with that. And the first thing I want to do is do a quick little review of how to serve static files in Django. So we've already talked a little bit about serving static files using Django when we included the CSS in our app. So let's take a look at our settings.py. I'm just going to quickly review again how we set up static files in a Django app. So at the bottom of our settings.py file, we have this static URL, which is just /static/. So that is the URL path that points to static files. And then this line of code here, this adds a directory that we started our base directory, which that's the directory where manage.py lives. And we go into wordy game app and then static. So this is on my local hard drive where static files live. And we've already made inside of that, earlier we made a CSS directory. I've also made a JavaScript directory now that I've added a file called setpassword.js. So JS is the standard file extension for JavaScript files. And so this JavaScript file that we'll go over in a few minutes, need in our template is a place to be able to include that on our set password template specific JavaScript page. So we have our full wordygame.html template that we've already looked at, and it has this block up in the head that we call head block. This is a place that we can include template specific CSS if we'd like in our child templates. We also have this block called content where our main content goes that our child templates will override with their own content. And then I've also added this block at the bottom of the body called JS block. So this is going to be where we store this is where we can include template-specific JavaScript. So let's take a look at our setpassword.html template and a couple of changes that I've made to it since the last time that we dealt with it. Really all I've done here is I've added this block.js block, and then I've added a script tag. So this is a normal HTML script tag. The only thing that's Django specific here is that I'm saying the source of my script is in my static files, then go into the directory wordygameapp/js and use the file setpassword.js. So this is how I'm including the JavaScript on our set password page. So let's take a look real quick at what that's done. So I'm going to tab over to our web browser here. We're going to go to the register link. I'm going to just pop in some username here, click our register button. And so now if I view the page source here and I scroll down to the bottom, don't worry about this commented out stuff. I'm going to cover that in a second. But we can see here that we've got a script tag that was added right before the closing body tag on this template. And if we look at this, the source of this script, we can see, okay, I'm going to go through this file in just a minute, but this matches this file on my local hard drive. Okay, so that's how we've set up this URL where we start with /static, then go to the directory wordygame, then JS, then set password.js. The reason that this URL points to this file on the hard drive is because in my settings.py I have my static URL set as /static/. So that matches here. And then I have in my static files dirs list this directory where I start at my base directory. That's where manage.py lives. Go into the directory wordygame app and then into the directory static. So that's how we tie up, or that's how we wire up our static files between our, where they're actually located on our local storage and the URL. Okay, so now we have a place in our parent template for our whole app that we can put JavaScript that is specific to a child template if the child template wants to. Now, why do we bother with that? Why not just include the JavaScript site-wide? The reason is that we don't want to send the JavaScript for this set password functionality to every single page that a user accesses on our site. There's just no need to send that every time. And so when we have, if there was a JavaScript function that we needed on multiple pages or all of our pages, then what we would do is go ahead and include that JavaScript in our parent template. We would even do it outside of this JS block. We would just do it like right here or below the JS block, depending on if the order of how the JavaScript files were imported matters. But this set password functionality, we don't want this to be included in every page. We're not going to need it anywhere else. So it's better to just include this JavaScript file in the one template where we're going to need it. Okay, so now we've got our JavaScript file wired up and working in our app. Let's actually use a little JavaScript. So the first thing we're going to do to reformat this code is we're going to actually take out the HTML form, and I'm going to delete that input of type submit as well, because what we're going to do now, I need to move this. So what we're doing now is we're changing things a little bit so that we are going to have what looks like an HTML form, but it's not technically going to be an HTML form because it's not enclosed in HTML form tags. And it's also not going to, right now, it's not really going to do anything whenever we click the button, because instead of an HTML input of type submit, what we're using now is just an HTML button. By default, an input of type submit, when you click it, it's going to do whatever the method and action are on your form. So on our old form, let me bring that back real quick. The method was post and the action is our current, whatever the request.path is. So when you click an input of type submit, it's going to make a new HTTP request of whatever type is in this method, and it's going to send the form data along to whatever the action is, wherever it's going. We're not going to be doing that anymore in this set password form. What we're going to do now, let me delete this out real quick. What we're going to do now is just show the form to our user. And again, it's not technically an HTML form. It's just going to be some HTML inputs. We'll show that to the user, collect the password and the verification of the password from the user, and then we're going to transfer those to our server using Ajax. In this video, we're not going to get that far. I just want to show us how to deal with JavaScript a little bit. So let's take a look at, now that I've changed this template up, let's take a look at what that did to our actual site. So here I'm going to refresh, and it didn't really do anything. It changed the CSS styling on the button a little bit, but that's all. If we view the page source here, we can see that we do have our hidden input named CSRF middleware token. Remember, we have to send that in with every form request that we send into Django. And then we get our form, our Django form, from our password form, just like we got before. So this is still a Django form, okay? It's just not enclosed in a form tag anymore, so it's not technically an HTML form. It's just HTML inputs that were rendered through a Django form. So this is where Django forms did confuse me for a while, because I tend to think of forms as an HTML form. In Django, really, it's better to think of forms as serializers. They basically, what they do is they translate data into and out of our database. So this code in our template, or in our rendered template, all comes from our Django form. Then we have a button here. Its class is form_button, just to give it a little bit of CSS styling. And then it has an on-click handler. And what this is in this on-click, I can define any JavaScript. I can just call whatever JavaScript I want. And so this handle submit click, I'm going to go back over to PyCharm real quick. We see in our HTML template that our on-click action is a JavaScript function called handle_submit_click. So if we go into setPassword.js, we see I have a function with that name in JavaScript, and this JavaScript is included in our template with this line right here. So now what's going to happen when we click that button is this code's going to run. We're just going to log out to the console, hello world. So let's test that. And the way to see console output, if you're using a Chrome-based browser, you can right-click and click Inspect. I think it's the same on Firefox, but I'm not sure. But anyway, there will be a way to get to the JavaScript console in your browser. If you're having trouble with that, let me know in the class Slack, and I'll help you get that fixed. But this is my JavaScript console here. And when I click my button that I made, we see in my console, I get this hello world code. So that's one way of setting up an action to happen dynamically on our page when we click a button. In my button, I can just set its on-click action to some JavaScript function that I name. And then when I write that function, whatever I write in here is going to happen every time this button gets clicked. So you see, Chrome doesn't keep adding new lines if you print the same thing over and over. This just says, hey, this got printed to the console 3 times, and now it'll go 4 or 5. You know, however many times I click the button, this code's going to run, and it's going to log to the console, hello world. Okay, so now we have our JavaScript code responding to anytime we click our button. Let's look now at how we can start gathering data from our user using JavaScript. So anything our user types into these password inputs, we need to get those values in our JavaScript code. And the way we can do that, if we right-click here and view our page source, or also another way of doing this, you can right-click on an element and click Inspect. And that'll bring the element up over here in our inspector window. And we can see here this input its name is password, and its ID is equal to ID underscore password. That might be hard to read, so let me go to the page source where I can blow that up a little bit. There we go. And if I go down here, this is our same input here. The input name password, and its ID is ID underscore password. So if we have an ID with an element, that's usually the best, or I don't want to say the best thing, but it's a good thing to use in JavaScript when you want to select that thing. So if we want to get the value that's in this input, we can use its ID in JavaScript. So the way we do that, if we look in this setPassword.js file, again, that's in our Wordy Game App static Wordy Game App JS directory. I'm creating this variable here called password. So the const keyword here, what this means is I'm creating a constant. So this is a variable that's immutable. We'll get more into immutability versus mutability in the future. But for now, you can just think of this as a variable whose value is not going to change. And this variable's value comes from this JavaScript function, document.getElementID, document.getElementById. And what that does, surprisingly enough, is it goes through our document, looks for an ID with whatever element we pass in here as a string. Okay, so that's going to get the input. That's going to get this whole thing here. That's going to give us a reference to whatever on the page has the ID underscore password. And then in this case, the only thing I want to do is get the value out of there. So I go ahead and say, set the value to this const password to our whatever element in our document has the ID underscore password, and get that value. So basically what this does, what this line does, and verify password is almost exactly like it, is what we're doing is we're going to the document, getting the element with either ID password or ID verify password, getting that value and putting it into these variables. So basically what this code is doing is it's saying, okay, whatever our user typed into these two inputs, grab those values. I'm also getting our CSF middleware tokens value, and I'll talk about this one in the next video a little bit because we're not going to be using the CSF middleware token in this video, but we will need it in the next video when we actually send our AJAX request. I'm also getting a handle to the element in our document that has the ID error div. And if we look back over at our template, what this div is, it's just a place that we're going to be able to show errors to our user if there are any. And in the template, I actually add this class dnone here. And if you look in our wordygame.css, I just used the same class name that Bootstrap uses for this. This is just a way to hide an HTML element. So if the CSS for an element has the display value of none, that means it's just not going to be shown on the page. So that's why this error div, I want it to be hidden unless there is an error. And by default, when they come to the page, or the initial state of the page is not an error. So I go ahead and hide the div, but I get a handle to that div with this variable here named error underscore div. I go to my document, I get the element that has this ID. So if we look back over here, you can see there's a div that's hidden with the ID error underscore ID. So once we have these values, we can do a little bit of client-side verification. I want to point out here that client-side verification is only for user convenience. Just because we do client-side verification with JavaScript doesn't mean that we're going to trust the value when we send it back to our backend. our backend is going to treat every single thing that comes to it as if it is completely untrustworthy and from a malicious user, okay? So this verification that we're doing on the front end, this is just to make our users' life a little bit easier. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make sure that before they submit their password, that whatever they put in the password input matches what they put in the verify input, okay? So once we have the value from our text input with the ID password and the one with ID verify password, what we want to do, this might not be clear why we need to do this yet, but I'll show it in a second. I want to hide the error div just in case it's been shown, because every time we click the button, we need to get our values and figure out if they're valid or not. If they're invalid, we're going to show the error div. But if they're valid, we won't show the error div. So we're going to hide it here in every case. Then we're going to figure out if we need to display it or not. And so if our user's password isn't entered, so if they don't put anything into the password field or into the verify password field, then we're going to get an error that says you must enter both passwords. And the reason we're going to get this error is I've written this little helper function called show password error, and I'm going to go ahead and open that up right now. All I do in this function is get a handle to our error div again, same way we did it in this handle submit click function. And then I set the inner HTML of this div to a paragraph tag plus the error message that got passed into this function, and then a closing paragraph tag. And then I go to this error div and I go to its class list. So this is a variable that exists on the object that's returned from a document.getElementById. Its class list is the list of classes that are applied on whatever element we're dealing with here. And what I want to do is I want to remove the dnone class from that list. Now, this remove function, one nice thing about it in JavaScript is that it's safe to run this function even if the class doesn't exist, just nothing will happen. Your code won't crash if the class doesn't exist, it just will go on. So this will remove the dnone class from our error div, which is going to, again, that dnone class sets the display value to none. So that's what hides an element. So if we remove that class, it's going to make that element show. So let's see what happens when we click our button and our text inputs are both blank. We get our error div like we expect, and then we see in the console, we get this error message that our user did not enter both passwords. So that's nice. Our client-side validation is working. Now remember, this is just to provide convenience for the user. Let's do a quick recap of what we've looked at so far. So right now we have this handle submit click function. This function gets fired every time this button is clicked. The reason that happens, if we go back into our set password template, is that this is where our button is being created, and its on click value is the handle submit click function. This function can be found because we include this JavaScript, our setPassword.js file, in with our setPassword template. When this function begins running, we gather the values that our user has input for password and verify password. We also get a handle to our error div so that we can hide it. And then we check to see if the passwords are equal. If they are not, we show our error div with this show password error function. And again, all this function does is get a handle to our error div, and then it adds the error message passed inside of HTML paragraph tags. and then it removes the CSS class dNone from our error div. That's what makes the error div display. So that's what happens if the user didn't enter a value for one of the two passwords. On the other hand, what we could do, or what could happen, is our user might not enter the same thing in both fields. If that happens, we're going to let the user know. And in this case, I'm actually not going to log anything to the console, and I'm going to delete this out. I just wanted to show you guys that you can log things out to the console in all these cases. That can help you troubleshoot if you're having bugs in your code. So let's see this else if statement. So I'm going to put something in here, put something different in here, click my button, and we see my error div shows now that the passwords did not match. That's great. Now, now what I'm going to do is put in the same password both times. So it's not blank and they are the same. And when I click my button, that div goes away. And that's actually what we want. I want to walk through this logic real quick. What happened in this case is we clicked the handle, we clicked the button that fires off this function, we collected our two values, and then we checked this was not true because there was a value for both of them. Also, this was not true because the two values matched. So this line of code ran. And that's why the error div just went away, because when we first clicked this function, we hide the error div, then we see if there is an error, and if so, we show the error div. So in this else statement is where we're actually going to be sending our AJAX request in the next video. That's where we're going to leave this video. In the next video, we will actually implement that else statement, and we'll start sending some AJAX to our Django backend.